Hey everybody, here with Teklo's workshop once again. I've got Rose here with me, who ended up going 15 and 0, Swiss record at the Battle Hardened and PTI event in Charlotte a couple weeks ago. And I'm excited to talk to her about everything that she thought did well, maybe didn't do well, and we'll dive into her brain and see what a real mechanologist looks like. But yeah, who are you?
Uh, Rose, I've been playing card games for quite some time, Flesh and Blood for a couple of years. Mechanologist is definitely my main class, and love my partner is a big part of playing Flesh and Blood for me, and we travel together, and yeah.
Very nice. So I like to dive into how people can, kind of interact outside of the tournament and everything to start off with. So just how was your time in
Oh,
Charlotte
yeah.
overall? Like, did you have any great food or anything like inside or outside the tournament that really struck your mind?
So we actually spent like very little time in Charlotte itself because my partner's father lives in Asheville. It was like an 8 or 10 hour drive for us to get to the venue. Uh, so we don't get to see him very often, and it's great anytime we do. Uh, Charlotte itself, we found one restaurant that was really good, Romeo's Vegan Burgers, and that was amazing. Down in Asheville, which was pretty close to it, we went to a folk music event with like
Oh,
16 different artists,
oh,
and
that's
that
awesome.
was excellent. That was
Yeah. Oh, I bet Asheville has a bunch of really great events like that all the time.
oh yeah, yeah.
So you said you've been playing Flesh and Blood for a few years. What set did you get into it, and what kind of made you be a mechanologist person to start with?
Yeah, we started when Aria was new.
Okay.
It hadn't like just come out, but it was the most recent set. We started like kind of as a game that we were going to play between Magic tournaments, and we didn't really
Mm-hmm.
think that we'd go very far with it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of just get a couple of starter decks, maybe some packs. Um, and the reason we dove into it a little bit further was um, my partner and I were driving back from a trip, and someone that we were living with at the time had called us and said that they had COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm immunocompromised, and me getting that would be worse than your average person.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to stay with some friends. And right next to their house, someone on Marketplace was selling their collection of Flesh and Blood,
Oh,
which was a bunch of Blitz precons, almost a playset of every card that existed at the time. And we got that and spent a couple of weeks just building decks and learning the game together.
did you
And
immediately
that was kind of our introduction.
did you immediately start off with mechanologist once you got that?
So mechanologist was the one class that was very underrepresented in
Mm.
that collection, and
Okay.
there were not enough cards to build mech. I started with Lexi,
Okay.
but
Good
after
start.
playing for a couple of months, I built a dash deck out of a bulk box and never looked back. Uh,
Oh,
so 6 months of Lexi and then 2.5 years of mechanologist.
yeah. Same for me. Same for me. I just started off with mechanologist and kind of bounced around a little bit, but it always end up coming back to it. It's
Hmm.
just so much fun. I've always been a person who,
Yeah.
whenever I play card games, I like to move dice around a lot and kind of have little tiny incremental value. And mechanologist is
Oh, you get
perfectly
to push a lot
that.
of buttons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very fun. So I assume whenever Bright Lights was announced and all of these heroes were coming out, then you were super excited for it. Were you immediately drawn to Dio from that set, or did you kind of look into the hype a little bit more, or maybe Teklo?
Um, I I was more excited about Io than I was about the other two heroes in the set, definitely. Dash is the character I love.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sure if I was gonna play her or mostly Inventor Extraordinaire.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up not like I played with her a bit, but I still played more hybrid and control dash right around that time.
Yeah.
Um, it was probably at least 6 months later that I really spent a good amount of time with Dash.io.
Was that before or after the
Bright Lights,
Cerebellum?
oh, well before Cerebellum.
Okay.
Yeah, probably about a year before that, I want to say.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Bright Light.
Go ahead.
Oh, just that was a really exciting set for me because I don't remember if it was the pre-release or the release date that happened to be on my birthday.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
that's always a
yeah,
great time. So you and your partner like went out for the pre-release and bought some boxes or and cracked some packs of bright lights.
we had been playing card games together for like 10 years and we do not do sealed product. We just get singles,
Okay.
but this was the one time we got a case.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we
I'm
yeah.
with you on that one. So, kind of moving into
Yeah.
like more of the event specific thing. What made you bring Dio over potentially like Inventor Extraordinaire to this? Like, why? What do you think the meta brought that Dio could attack better than Inventor Extraordinaire?
Um, the big thing was just the top decks were Aurora, Syndra, and New. It looked like it was going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and those are not terrible matchups for Control Dash.
Mm.
You've got like plenty of disruptive attacks now, but against Aurora and Syndra, it's like a tight 50-50, and what their deck does impacts the variance more than what mine does. So I'm kind of just running the same script all day and hoping that the coin lands on my side if I take that deck. New, I would be like super happy to play Inventor Extraordinaire against because that
Mm.
feels like 80-20 or better. But IO is probably 90-10 against Syndra and 60-40 against Aurora. New is probably close to 50-50, but a little bit new favored.
Mm.
So it just felt like a better spread into the decks that people were likely to play.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna love to pick your brain about that Syndra matchup and that new matchup later because I think, from my experience, those are a little bit worse. But before I want to go into like the deck philosophy of like how you went around building your deck. So you like I like to also approach a deck with like kind of a main philosophy in the same way that you did with your zeros and twos kind of ideas instead of playing that many ones. Kind of, how did you come up with that idea and like where does that testing come in?
Well, it actually started like before we even had T-Bone.
Mm,
Uh, I was playing I was playing Max Velocity the first time I played Dash, and the people around me said that Max Velocity was inconsistent even then, but
mm,
it didn't seem to be. And like you block with it against aggro sometimes,
mm,
but I when Everfest was ready to come out, the thing I said that I wanted from that set was 0 to 50. I wanted an 0 for 3 boost card. I didn't need it to do anything fancy. I just wanted another on rate boost.
mm,
And that's when we got T-Bone. And I just kind of continued on with that deck and gradually changed it as new cards came out. And when we got Bright Lights, that's when we got a bunch of 0 cost and 1 cost and really able to choose between the curve we wanted.
mm.
Um, and the 0 cost just seemed a lot easier to manage because Mechanologist is really good at spending resources.
Yes.
So it doesn't really matter whether your core costs 0 or 1. You're probably going to use all your resources, and the deck deals so much damage every turn that you're probably getting over their defenses anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So breakpoints are less important to me than raw damage. Uh, and while zeros and fours or zeros and ones are like the same rate, the zeros play better into max velocity, which has always been part of my core,
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm playing penetration script, but that's another story. Um, and the other thing that makes the zeros more appealing to me is your all red hands feel really good.
Yeah.
If you're on 1 costs, you're pitching a red to play a red and then pitching a red to heart. But with the zeros, you can just boost 1 and then pitch a red to heart, and you're usually okay. Uh, Same with a Spark of Genius trying to find you a blue. You can boost a 0 cost and then Spark, and if it draws a blue, you didn't have to commit a red to pitch at all.
Mm-hmm. And like with the
Um,
trying to figure out like your exact like what you're doing with what cards you're playing, like what does your testing process look like for oh this like this card doesn't feel that great, but like who are you testing with? Do you have like a team that you're testing with, or is it just you and your partner? Or are you like a lone wolf kind of vibe?
it starts with me and my partner.
Mm-hmm.
The deck has really evolved very gradually in an almost organic process, really,
Mm.
changing a couple of cards at a time. Every now and then, I have an idea that I want to try to build something from scratch, but um, generally, when that happens, I either throw it together, talk to my partner about it, and we work on it together, or I build it in secret and don't tell them anything about it, and then take it to Armory and try to get them to ask me what I'm doing. Uh, but we we go to 5 armories a week,
Okay.
so it's pretty easy just to like throw a deck together and see if it works.
Yeah, and it so it does really sound like this deck has been kind of evolving throughout. I mean, you said it was before T-Bone even, so even before Everfest. Like this
Yeah,
is basically kind of the same core idea of what you've been doing for the past what 3 years or something. So I mean
yeah.
that's like pretty impressive. Like sticking to it and just kind of like organically coming up with it and like is it more of a gradual approach whenever something happens, or is it at some point it just like completely shifts and you're like, oh, now I'm playing Control Dio and like CYB or something crazy like that.
Um, so so I started on Hybrid Dash,
Yeah.
and I still feel like I'm playing that deck
Okay.
because at home I've got this box of Mechanologist cards that includes my 80 for Control Dash, my 80 for Aggro Dash, which is IO right now,
Mm-hmm.
and everything in between. And choosing whether I'm aggro or control, or even where on that spectrum I'm going to be for this next event coming up, is kind of the same exercise as sideboarding for, but instead of sideboarding aggro or control per matchup, I'm doing it per event and then choosing the more intricate twists of that in matchups. Um, so I do prefer the two extremes now. I pretty rarely take hybrid to stuff, but I still play both pretty frequently. And anytime there's a meta shift, I'm reassessing which one would be good right now.
Do you think that Flesh and Blood as a game like doesn't really lend itself to allowing you to play that hybrid sort of thing, or do you think that it's just so much better to pick one lane or another lane and go like all fatigue or all aggro?
I think it's a preference call. I think hybrid is just as good, um, because the hybrid list gets to be 80% as good in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are definitely metas where picking an extreme is going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the reason I've been off hybrid for so long is just um, preferring to be one of the extremes rather than alternating.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like looking at your deck list here, I just want to kind of like go into the equipment a little bit and something that like I didn't realize that you could really do. I mean, I did, but like, I just had never really thought about it like that, but playing like the stone wall and then putting the plating in the feet. This is a little bit
Hmm.
like different for me because I never really thought about doing something like this. And like, how are you using these in conjunction with each other, and how does that kind of add to the aggro-ness of it? Because this deck is extremely aggro, like playing blue boom grenades and like kind of all that stuff.
Yeah.
So why does the equipment
Uh,
specifically blocking help you on your aggro plan?
so the Stonewall Gauntlet is there mostly for Azalea.
Okay.
Um, being on an equipment suit that can block for 9 if we need to,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can throw a card from hand as well. Um, that matchup pretty much always comes down to how many red in the ledgers are going to connect. Uh, Most of the time, I would say that she fires 2 relatively large red in the ledger. One gets blocked out by equipment, the other's going to connect. And if it was more or less than that, that probably decides the matchup right there. If it was the two that we hit on average, then it's probably close to a 50-50
Okay.
game. Yeah.
And then so Stonewall doesn't really like have that. I mean, it has the effect of blocking one against the Zalia or blocking two against the Zalia, and then it also. Do you also play it against Syndra or like the ninjas that don't really want to break the chain a lot?
Um, I don't know. My opinion on Syndra, which is so frequently with that because so many Syndras are not buffing their attacks.
mm,
At least not very often. Like a lot of them have, I get +1 if I follow a Draconic, or they're all on Wrath of Retribution, but the games are so fast that they probably don't find it.
yeah.
So against Syndra, it's so commonly 1 point, but that 1 point so frequently is able to facilitate blocking out a mask trigger.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know about playing it into Syndra. Achilles is probably just as good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's probably up to preference which one is the better choice there. I switch from day to day. Um, I 100% play Stonewall into other ninjas though.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
Okay. And then, so if the idea of the Stonewall is mostly about like blocking Azalea, why not just play a second plating instead?
Right. So against Azalea, you need it to be able to block
Mm-hmm.
on a very specific turn.
Mm.
The odds of having one item that you don't mind losing on that turn are very high. The odds of having two get a little shaky.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable on one adaptive plating, but two, probably not unless I'm not as worried about specific on hits.
Okay. And then as like going into like the entirety of the deck again, like are you ever playing a lean 60? Are you what's kind of your idea of when you're playing what cards? Like are you like I play 60 versus Aurora and Syndra, but like most of the other time it's around like 63 to 67 cards. What's like your idea with how many cards you're playing?
There are three matchups where I play straight 60.
Okay.
Uh, Acilio, Kano, in the mirror. Anything else, I'm going to be adding cards to it. Um, it's not always consistent necessarily because I'm going a little bit on the vibes of the player that I'm up against, if I know
Mm.
them or if I've seen them play a little bit. Because I do try to watch the people around me.
Yeah.
One of the advantages to being Leo is that you finish before everyone else, win or lose.
Mhm.
Uh, so you've got time to like kind of assess. Against most Auroras, maybe I want to present 64, but if this one's a little more comfortable blocking, I might go up to 66.
Mhm.
Uh, but whenever I sit down against my opponent, I look at their hero and them if I know them well enough to do that, and I assess how many cards I want to bring, and then what cards I should cut.
Okay. And like kind of that idea of kind of metagaming the exact tournament that you're at. Sometimes you're not at an armory, you're at a calling or a battle hardened. Whenever you're like trying to figure out kind of what the vibe is of that person, is are you looking mostly at like the people around you, like in the tables near you, or like going around to more bottom tables if you lost, or going up a table if you've won? What's your idea behind that?
Usually looking at the top tables or the ones right above me
Mm.
on the notion that if I've lost enough that I'm at the lower tables already, I'm probably not making the top prizing anyway.
Yeah.
Um, I guess if we're still like trying to squeeze the mid-tier prizes on something that still gives tickets, I'd
Mm.
look where I think I'm going to be, but ideally the seat's a little higher than me.
Yeah.
Um,
And like how like in
yeah.
tune are you like in watching their games? Are you like just, scoping out for 5 seconds, or are you gonna like go stand over and be like, oh, they're playing this weird card. What's going on over there?
On the better days, I know what has happened in my game and the
Mm.
games on either side of me.
Okay.
And once we're finished, I usually pace around the tables that I'm trying to discern what they're doing
Mm.
for as long as I can without making anyone uncomfortable. Like keep a safe
Yeah, yeah,
distance, of
yeah.
course. Looking for like specific cards that could tell me anything at all. Um, Keeping my eye out for decision points that would tell me anything, stuff
Mm.
like that.
Yeah, making sure that the new behind or new right in front of you is not like CYB, or if there's something else like that definitely
Yeah,
helps out a
yeah,
lot if you go into a matchup knowing there's CYB or not.
exactly.
And kind of going back into the deck list here, I see that you're playing Optical Monocle. Whenever you're playing this card, how exactly like are you using it? Are you looking for specific things on the top, or are you just kind of value playing Optical Monocle, looking for items to play, or what's the deal with that?
Optical Monocle has three jobs depending on the matchup.
Okay,
Uh, if I bring it into like an assassin,
okay,
because I'll always play it here. Uh, if they are just blocking me out,
hmm,
or if I'm playing it against more defensive classes, I'm usually going to use it to make sure I don't boost away cards that'll be important later,
okay,
which is mostly Max Velocity and Spark and Red Protocol.
hmm,
Because we're going to shuffle a couple of times anyway, so it doesn't matter if we put two Max Vs to the bottom, because we'll just shuffle them back in and we'll probably be able to play them a little later.
hmm,
But if I'm in a matchup where I go in with that plan, and they end up not being as defensive as I thought they would,
hmm,
Optical's job shifts from prep for the late game to make sure I find an item on a turn I wouldn't, or make sure that my draw into the next turn is not terrible. Um, if I've just finished a turn, I'm about to play my last thing that'll take an action point, and there's a yellow grenade on top. I don't want to draw that, so we monocle that to the bottom until we find something at least reasonable.
okay, interesting. So we have prep for late game, or we have making sure that we're drawing reasonable cards. And what would be your third job for Optical Monocle?
Well, the third one is just to make sure I get an item this turn.
Okay, yeah, making sure that we
Yeah.
get items. Okay, and are you playing Optical Monocle? Is this mostly just for the like fatiguey matchups, or are you playing this into some of the faster mid rangey stuff, maybe like KO or Leviah, who's just presenting damage but not presenting any like on hits?
Um, the closer to fatigue they are, the more likely I am to bring in optical.
Hmm.
I probably would not bring it into most brutes, but I would bring it into Rhinar.
Okay. And why Reinar specifically?
They just tend to be more defensive than the others.
Okay.
KO is going to be on a bunch of two blocks.
Mm.
Leviah is going to kill herself. It's still too long.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I've had plenty of Levias who are like at 30 and they're like, oh, there's no way that I'm ever going to have any problems. And then they're at 6 the next and they're like, oh, hold on a second. We're kind of screwed here. I can't flip. So that's always a fun matchup, not being able
Yeah.
to let them flip. And then so like if you're like in more of an aggro matchup and you're seeing like a max V on top and you can draw it, like are you just pretty much like snapping the max V every single time if you have a processor and an action point?
Um, Against aggro, if I'm able to cast the Max V, absolutely.
Mm,
There are hands where I'll pass up on it if we don't have any resources left and I'm just trying to find a better card to arsenal and we're low.
mm-hmm.
Because if I'm having to block, then I don't really want to risk arsenaling that one. But if it's early game, Max V is my favorite card to arsenal.
Mm.
Uh, usually.
Yeah. Is that only specifically like whenever you have Crown of Providence up, or do you sometimes arsenal it even if you don't have the ability to cop it away?
I would say that 80 to 90% of hands that are five cards that start with a max V are able to play it.
Oh yeah.
So I'm pretty comfortable arguing that
Mm-hmm.
against like anything that is not going to take all my cards away.
Okay.
If a new is being particularly aggressive, I might hesitate a little more on that.
Mm.
But against just an aggro deck, 100% arsenal that as long as I'm above 20.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you've obviously thought a lot about mechanologist class and everything like that. So, like, what kind of archetypes of Dash IO would you say there are? And, like, what are the differences between them? And would you say this is more playstyle oriented, or would you say that there's specifically a best one to play right now?
Do you want the long answer or the short one?
I would love the long answer.
Okay, so let's take a step back to chess.
Okay.
We've been playing chess for several thousand years now,
Mm-hmm.
at least a few thousand, and we do not yet agree on the best opening.
True.
There are more possible games of chess than there are atoms in the known universe, and compared to Flesh and Blood, chess is a very simple game.
Mm.
There are less pieces, less ways for them to move, uh, no hidden variables. It's just an equation that we both have access to every piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken us thousands of years to scratch the surface on like what the best openings might be. So in Flesh and Blood, I think the notion that we have found a best deck for any hero
Mm.
is nonsensical.
Okay.
I think that even the worst heroes probably have between 6 and 20 competitively viable lists that we'll just probably never find because we're not going to be able to dig that deep in the card game because of how long it takes.
Mm-hmm.
So for Dash IO specifically, I think she's one of the more complicated ones that has ridiculous amounts of possibilities that would the number of viable lists would probably be surprising. I think the number of archetypes that we've found is relatively small.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Max V spin that I've been playing,
Mm.
the pen script list that I was playing before that. Um, there's the more breakpoints and grenades oriented lists that have been most of what was popular for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, before that, people were focusing on dominate, and I don't know that that one can go as far. But it might have an end game that we haven't thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've kind of gotten the starting points of exploring a lot of other archetypes for her that I need to do a lot of work on in order to see where they go. I think there are at least 3 concepts for Control Dash IO that are good, but just never been explored because we all think of her as an aggro deck.
Yeah. Yeah, I see a lot of people like in the Dash.io Discord specifically talking about, oh, does anyone have this control dash? I know there's one person in the Discord that is always popping off about control dash, and I'm like very interested in how that goes for them because I just think it's really silly. Like that's one of my favorite things about mechanologists in general is you can put like dash IE down at the table and they can just lose in sideboarding because you can just be playing all boost, or you could flip over your equipment and you're just playing pistol package and like
Absolutely.
you sideboarded 60 cards in and now you're gonna get fatigued, and it's just definitely one of the more interesting parts. One thing that like Dash IO hasn't been able to do as well, because I feel like she's very has been kind of like only put into this one thing, but like for a control setup, like what do you think that would even entail? Like what kind of cards? Like would you be playing the equipment that you play in your deck and you could play on your arms, like the base arms and everything? What would that even look like?
So I've got a couple ideas.
Okay.
One that I was going to build when we were in spoiler season and just never got around to was pretty heavy on the Evo stuff.
Okay.
I was going to be playing Evo arms, legs, and head, and the end game was the attacks that get benefits based on how many Evos you have.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was going to be on Tunic for the last slot and just never get that final +3. But being able to play an item off the top on my opponent's turn off a
Yeah.
Tunic resource just seems too good to pass up.
True.
And some of the attacks just cost 1 resource anyway once you've got 3 pieces, so I think Tunic was almost as good anyway as the upgraded chest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the weapon was really good too at that point. It's just 1 resource for 2 with go again.
Yeah.
Um, and then uh, there was also one built around Nitro Mechanoid that I think would
Okay.
have been a lot easier to build when we still had high octane. Um, but I think that it's kind of still there. I think we're going to need more ways to get stuff underneath the Evos or time snaps.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Hmm.
yeah, there's There's also kind of a fatigue option built on Medkit and Symbiosis Shot, where we're playing all the D-Reacts, all of the 3 for 7 attacks in Mechanologist.
Okay.
There's debate as to whether or not you could play red grenades into aggro or not. But because if you send 7 at an Aurora, they're probably taking it.
Yeah.
Uh,
7 no on hits. I'm in.
yeah. And there are also elaborate things you can chain together with like prismatic lens that
Yes.
can. Yeah, I really like that card.
Yeah, I also really like that card. So do you think that like with this ability to like flip flop between different archetypes as Dash, do you think that now that we just saw the last calling and Jarl had a 60% day 2 rate, which is by far the highest that anything. If we go into more of a Jarl meta or a controlling meta with the Guardian pack coming out with Jarl doing well, do you think that it's time to switch up the archetype that we're currently in? From aggro to something maybe a bit more
Um,
mid rangey, maybe a bit more controlly.
I think that both paths have good options. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's going to be a lot easier to switch back to Inventor Extraordinaire
Mm.
and build the anti-aircraft gun against the Guardians. Um, I do think that Dash IO still has a lot of potential against Guardians,
Mm.
but it's going to be a lot of work every game. Um, there are great sideboard cards against them, like Polarity Reversal Script. Uh, the matchup, I got a little bit better than 50-50 last time Guardians were big, but we still had high octane at the time.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a lot of work in making up the lost ground there and figuring out exactly what we need to do into each Guardian and what sideboard cards have to exist to facilitate that.
Okay. And whenever you're like looking at who you're playing against, like the hero that you're playing against, what is like the ratio of items that you're kind of keeping in mind, like in your head, whenever you're doing your sideboarding? Are you always playing the same items every time, or are you bringing some other ones in sometimes? What does that look like whenever you are doing your sideboarding?
The blue items change a lot.
Okay.
Uh, I'm always I'm always going to present like 21 blues approximately,
Okay.
sometimes more if I'm bringing the whole list. But
Mm.
um, the red and blue item, or sorry, the red and yellow items don't change very much. Occasionally, I will cut very reluctantly, mind you, because I hate cutting them, a red protocol or two.
Hmm.
I am supposed to cut two against Syndra. I frequently only cut one because I love them too much.
Yeah.
Um, because if you find one early and then need to spark for it later, it's just sad.
Hmm.
But I do think that our odds are a little better if we're willing to cut two of them against Syndra, because they are really bad to draw.
Yeah.
Whereas everything else is fine. Like a yellow grenade, you play it from your hand, it's still going to hit her for 3.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and against the more defensive stuff, yellow grenades end up getting pitched more often if you draw them, but they're
Mm.
still really good to have in the deck.
Yeah. And do you have like a like an idea of like an exact ratio of items that you're playing every single time, or is it just kind of like vibe space? It's like, oh, this time I'm gonna take out the two, or what's the deal with like the exact numbers?
It is a little more on. It's a little more on vibes, I guess.
Mm.
Uh, it is pretty much always. See, I run 11 blue boost cards, a cog, and the rest of my blues are going to be items.
Mm.
In the reds and yellows, I'm always going to be on the grenades and the red protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's 9 that usually stay in. The protocol can come and go. Uh, and I'm a little less likely to cut the red protocols if I'm going first, because you
Okay.
want a little more item density for turn 0.
Yeah. Definitely. And are you always choosing to go first, basically?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Same.
I don't think I've ever chosen to go second.
Yeah, I know.
Gotta go.
I love whenever I'm playing against like Aurora or Syndra, and they're like, aggro matchup. I'm gonna go second. I'm like, thank God.
Yeah,
Whew.
I do think that in aggro mirrors, it's very innocuous whether we go first or second,
Mm,
especially against like Syndra, where the damage is predictable. It just doesn't really matter. But I think there's like a couple percentage points better if I'm going first.
hmm And so, like with Syndra specifically, you claim a 90-10 matchup spread, which is pretty good. So, like, how exactly are you getting that? In what ways are you blocking to get that matchup spread? What ways are you attacking? Like, what is that? What does a game against Syndra look like? A good game versus a bad game?
Yeah, so the deck is like really consistent, even with the max Vs. You're
Mm.
pretty much always going to be presenting level at least 14 damage a turn as your average, usually
Mm-hmm.
a little higher. Um, and Syndra's average damage is just a little bit lower than ours.
Mm.
It's not by a lot. I think it's like 2 points a turn. And in addition to being just a little bit slower than us, her armor doesn't block.
Yeah.
The hat blocks a little bit, but we're going into that matchup with 8 to 10 points of armor, and
Yeah.
she's coming with 4,
Yeah.
5, whatever. Um, so the blocking we do is largely to mitigate mask triggers,
Mm-hmm.
of course. Um, because she's never going to block anyway, the only time I'm happy to give her a mask trigger is if I have a Spark of Genius or a Max Velocity.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, I'm usually going to try blocking twice per turn because that'll stop her mask triggers.
Okay.
And
So you're
yeah, the
blocking
equipment
twice per
plays a huge role
turn,
there.
like every turn, basically. Well, I mean every turn. The game's only 4 turns long versus Syndra, but like you're
Yeah,
basically always
the
just
game.
like using your equipment quickly, like using your block like cards out of your hand quickly, unless of course you have a big combo turn coming up.
Yeah, the game's 4 turns long. I would say I block twice on 2 of them.
Okay.
Because one's to protect the combo and the next to secure the kill.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Of course, it can go wrong if you're drawing like all items or something like that, but that's pretty rare. Even if your hand is all blue or all red and just doesn't work together very well, you're taking like 2 to 4 damage for that.
Yeah, that's true. That yeah, no, that is really nice about playing against Syndra. But you know, she didn't really perform very well at the calling. But we do have what looks to be just the straight up best deck in format. So, what would you say that your ideas against Aurora are? Because that deck is a little bit more hard to deal with her fours instead of threes,
Yeah.
basically. So, what kind of ideas are you doing? Are you going against Aurora with?
Aurora is going to be one of the more complicated matchups, of course.
Okay.
Uh, if they're on Face Purgatory,
Mm.
that's bad for us. But most of them are just on Crown right now because they're more concerned about instants than non-attack actions.
Mm.
It feels a lot like playing the mirror, except
Yeah.
she's a little bit slower and a little bit happier to block.
Mm.
Her on hits last the full turn. Just like our boom grenades, their on hit is an additional 4 damage, or draw a card, which is gonna be another four
Or
damage.
yeah, it's basically a boom
Uh,
grenade. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. Um, the difference is that she had to play it from hand and we didn't.
Yeah.
Uh, we have to use our armor a little differently there, where we're going to use pretty much all of it on one turn.
Mm.
Uh, we're not going to be able to block out multiple on hits from her because they affect the whole turn.
Hmm.
So we commit armor when we think we're going to be able to stop a valley or burn up from hitting,
Okay.
uh, and just commit everything on that turn, deny that one card. That
Interesting.
goes a long way.
Okay, so against Syndra, you're
Um,
taking a little bit more of a measured approach to it and kind of like blocking out multiple turns in a row. But against Aurora, it's more so we're jamming it all on one turn and hoping that we can stop them from doing this one turn.
yeah, and we have to be a little bit careful on which turn it is, because if
Hmm.
she's starting with a 5 card hand, a lot of times you're not going to have enough to stop it all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and with Syndra, sometimes I will play the more defensive deck in the matchup for a little bit longer if she gives me room to do so.
Mm-hmm.
There have been games where I'm happy to block with 3 cards against her for a little while I let a Teklo core carry me through boosting once and playing an item off the top.
Yeah.
Uh, Like if my turn's gonna deal 7 or more damage, I'm happy to block 9 and send that.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, which is yeah, which is why I don't present 60 into Syndra because it's going to cost cards to block, and if I do that for too long, I don't want to have to think about not using heart on a turn to conserve cards for the late game. I've gone down to 12 cards left against Syndra.
Oh, okay.
Most of them don't have that, but that's more
Okay.
common than you would think. I think.
So into these aggro matchups, are you playing Symbiosis Shot or Blaster, Hanabi Blaster into these?
Symbiosis shot for those ones.
Okay.
The more aggro they are, the more I need to play that one.
Mm-hmm.
Just because when we get down to that end game where we're both low on life, uh, it's too important for keeping those 1 and 2 card hands where we want to boost a
Mm-hmm.
0 to 60 and then symbiosis shot to pressure the life total twice, get them to
Yeah.
actually block.
Okay. Interesting. So the Blaster's more so for the like news or Guardian specifically.
Yeah, Vincent too, Florian,
Yeah.
anything that's anything that I'm not going to block against or anything that's going to take cards from me. I prefer Hanabi because Hanabi is absolutely the more efficient weapon now that we have cerebellum processors.
Yeah.
Every action point is pretty much accounted for.
Yeah, definitely. Well, without high octane, we now every action point is accounted for. And so are you like using the symbiosis shot like are if you have the 2 action points, are you basically always just popping it off twice at the end unless you have a processor, or do you sometimes forego that ponder token with the processor just to get another 2 damage through?
Well, we know what's on top, so it's pretty easy to evaluate whether or not the card should go in Arsenal. Um, and if you're ending your turn on Cerebellum Processor, it's not giving you the card on top, it's giving you the 5th card. So
Hmm.
you don't actually know what it's giving you, but a random card is usually better than a shot with Symbiosis.
Mm.
The only exceptions to that are if they're low enough that I know they have to block it in an aggro matchup, end game we're both at 2 or something,
Mm-hmm.
or if I'm against an Enigma and she's got wards up that need to go. Even then, though, probably taking the card is the more common choice.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's pretty rare, I think, to forego the card draw.
Okay. And then, so like for your like blue, yellow, and red kind of ratios, how much like thought have you put in? So you said you're always going to be playing 21, basically. Have you ever like gone below that or gone above that? What does that ratio look like? How did you end up with the numbers you have?
Um, the like we said earlier, the deck evolved pretty organically,
Mm,
and there was a lot of like, I feel like I need more blues or less, just like adding 1 or 2 and then playing that for a week and tweaking it very, very slowly.
mm-hmm.
Looking at hypergeometric calculators to back up what I'm seeing, make sure it's not confirmation bias. 21 is usually where I'm most comfortable, but if I'm on control dash, that usually kicks up to 24, 26. If I'm on a lot more zero costs, uh, sometimes it'll go as low as 18.
Mm,
Um, but so many of our blues just feel like reds to play that 21 just feels really safe in both directions.
yeah.
Um, and in terms of like the red and yellow ratios, I don't really differentiate them. When I'm building the deck, it's cards I want to play versus cards I want to pitch. So
Mm,
I count Master Cog as a blue card. Um, Yellow grenades can count as blue cards against more defensive stuff where I'm not willing to play them from hand. Um, yeah,
Oh, I also really wanted to talk about that, the
but
Master Cog. I have not seen this in any list
yeah.
before. So, like, how did you come to the Master Cog idea, and when does it like? Have you ever seen it completely pop off? Like, what's the ceiling on this card versus the floor?
Um, I mean, the floor for it is really not when you draw it and need the extra resource, but when you see it on top and it could have been an item.
Yeah.
We run enough items that most turns you find one, and boosting away a master cog is not a huge deal.
No.
I'll complain about it in jest because I love the thing, but in general, it's not one that you're trying to protect.
Okay.
Um, but sometimes you'll lose a resource. Rarely you'll lose an item. Usually, though, you have a crank item in play to give the counter to.
Yeah.
And usually it's a cerebellum processor. We really spend like 70-80% of games with the cerebellum in play,
Yes.
at least against the more aggressive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Against the more defensive stuff, putting it on a boom grenade is sometimes huge.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's pretty much giving up a resource for an extra draw on a cerebellum, which costs you a shot of symbiosis. So it's kind of complicated whether or not it's actually a good trade. But if cards are worth 3.5, then you're getting 1.5 damage
Mm.
out of a counter instead of the one resource. And as a mechanologist, resources roughly translate 1-to-1 with damage. So
Mm.
I like it, and I think that it is the best option for the deck the way I play it, but just barely.
Okay. So like it's not something like if you're on a budget here that it's like it's not mandatory basically. Like another item could go in there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a preference call whether or not it's even a better choice than like a blue boom grenade or something like that.
Okay.
If you don't like it, you probably should not be playing it.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And then I know that you're on the zeros and twos kind of idea, but I do see two one costs in the deck. What makes Pulse Wave Harpoon and Zipper Hit good enough to kind of get rid of that idea of zeros and twos to be still in the deck?
Okay, so the idea is not it's not supposed to be zeros and twos. It
Okay.
is that, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the original goal. It was supposed to be just I'm gonna play all the most efficient cards,
Mm.
and once those are used up, I'm gonna fill the rest out with zeros.
Okay.
And that'll facilitate the max velocities as easily as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So every card in the deck that does not cost zero is there for being dramatically above rate for some reason. The twin drive is there because it's two boosts for the max velocity, which is the same,
Yeah.
concept as having the zero cost stuff in there to begin with. Um, Max velocity itself is obvious because it's the core of the whole deck and the reason we're here. Uh, Heist Heist has the best text of every card in the deck. Um, I think that Heist is just barely worse than Max Velocity.
Mm.
Most turns where you're going to boost 3 times with a red grenade out, they think you're going to finish with a Max Velocity. It ends up being a Heist with a Goliath Gauntlet on it.
Mm.
The odds of that hitting are pretty high. Um, and then Throttle is just 1 point stronger than it should be, so we have to
Yes.
play that. And then the two one costs that you mentioned, Zipper Hit, 1 point stronger than it should be. It's in the list.
Mm-hmm.
And Pulse Wave Harpoon is just crazy against aggro when you're going to boost 3 cards, take one of theirs, and when their stuff attacks for 4 and blocks for 2, it's extra 2 point swing
Yeah.
just
So
to take the card.
and you only have one Teklo Pounder in here as well. Do you ever like think that you need some more versus these very fatiguey matchups where you can kind of build up some pounders, or do you think one is just fine for that? Like hoping to draw turn zero, Spark of Genius, and just go grab your Teklo Pounder.
So the Teklo Pounders fluctuate a lot.
Okay.
A lot of the blue items do for me. I'm pretty happy anywhere from 0 to 3 Tekla Pounders. Um, for Charlotte specifically, I actually was kind of agonizing over that the last couple slots, talking to my partner and our best friend in the hotel room and trying to decide between the Tekla Pounder, the Optical Monocle, the two red expedites, and then I had another pounder that I was considering, and I had a big shot, and two of those had to stay home.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I do see in the deck list here we've got a lot of ones and twos of in the blue spot
Mhm.
specifically. And is this more so like this is like where your meta calls come in, is in this blue like item situation with like signal jammers and Teklo pounders. Like, at what point would you cut signal jammers?
Signal Jammer is only played into two matchups, and only one of them matters. Uh, I played into Kano, and that's kind of a free win without it. It's here because of Azalea.
Okay.
Um, she's really scary because Red in the Ledger is mean.
Red
And
Ledger is mean.
uh, yeah. The two cards that are here just for her are Signal Jammer and uh, the Stonewall Gauntlet. And
Okay.
of course, like we said, I'll play Stonewall into other stuff, but she's the reason it's here.
Mm.
Um, that was another thing that I was kind of debating is all four of those slots could have been three Signal Jammers and a Stonewall Gauntlet.
Mm.
And now Azalea matchup feels really good. Or I can just play um, all the anti-fatigue items, cut the Jammer and the Gauntlet for a pair of Pounders, and now we're up to three.
Yeah.
Um, so I think fear of Guardians versus fear of Azalea is really what drives those last couple sideboard slots.
Okay.
And even in a meta that's like mostly aggro where we are now,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's still just going to be thinking about whether you're more likely to see a Guardian or an Azalea, because 67 cards gets you everything you're going to want against aggro. You're
Yeah.
not playing more than that against them, and it's
Yeah.
not going to change that much what those cards are.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot about like fear of Azalea versus fear of Guardian, but we have not talked a lot about fear of Assassins and New or Mario with all of their disruption that they have. Like, how exactly are you maneuvering around these matchups to kind of go around the disruption plus just like the annoying damage that they can do as well?
Yeah, so playing against Assassin, you're reevaluating your plan every turn.
Yeah.
Almost every link of the combat chain, because there are two things they can do that we care about. One is block, and the other is take our cards away.
Yeah.
Uh, if they were if they were just doing one of those things, we'd be super favored in the matchup. Our damage goes over their blocks,
Yeah.
and they don't take enough cards that their damage matches ours. Um, Switching between them makes it a lot more complicated.
Mm.
Uh, but I still think that IO is a little bit favored into most of them.
Mm.
New, I think, a little bit less so. But I think like if she kept enough cards to send a Bonds of Agony, I'm pretty okay with that because she took damage to keep it.
Yeah.
And now she's going to take one card out of my hand and a couple out of my deck. And even if it's Max Velocity or Spark of Genius, that's okay because her cards don't block that well.
Mm.
And enough damage, those cards dealt enough damage by convincing her to keep that hand already.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So are you kind of like just saying like no blocks, screw it, like come at me with whatever you got, or are you taking some time and like really like if it is a bonds, like are you block and you have like a max V and a spark in your hand, like are you blocking with those cards so that she can't take the other two, or like are you just no blocks, bring it?
Yeah, so normally, and obviously this answer could change if life totals are low and I'm worried about like actually dying.
Yeah.
But in general, I'm going to say no blocks unless I know exactly what's in their hand.
Mm.
Uh, if there's only one possible reaction left and I can play around it without too much trouble, then sure. But my armor is normally relegated to things like she blocks with three cards and plays Leave No Witnesses,
Mm.
uh, which usually happens a couple of times per game.
Mm.
Same with like Erase Face. Erase Face is one that I'll actually block fairly frequently because there's not much I can do if it hits me.
Yeah.
But other than that, generally no blocks.
Okay.
Bonds of Agony can take whatever card it wants to.
Yeah, all the cards are
Um,
basically the same card. Like, you know,
yeah,
if you take an expedite,
yeah,
it's like cool. I have three more sprocket rockets. Like, congrats.
yeah. Even if she takes Spark, which is the best card in the matchup,
Yeah.
that Spark, my playset of Spark of Genius dealt whatever damage she took to keep that Bonds of Agony, and that was
Mm.
enough.
Yeah. Okay. That does make a lot of sense. I always get scared whenever I see like bonds come down. I'm like, no, don't take my cards. But I guess I should just start saying no blocks more often to the news. And then
Yeah.
so like yeah, with that sort of matchup going against the news, going against the other assassins, like honestly don't really scare me nearly as much as New does. I don't know why. I just like she just has this fear factor for me.
Yeah, I think the worst one for us, at least for in my experience,
Mm.
would actually be Missouri.
Okay, yeah.
Um, Missouri can get really defensive. They're much more likely to be on like full play sets of all the over fours, and their erase faces are not face up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. I don't have any Azuris in my local meta, so I don't really like see that one very much. But like Azuri does just pop up in like top eight at Battle Hardens and top eight callings and like win Pro Tours and stuff.
Yeah,
So like she really can just come out, and I think that that's like definitely a factor that works in her favor that people don't really know the matchup very well. And like she has a lot of
definitely.
tech cards. Yeah, it's kind of like mechanologist. Like there's a lot of weird stuff that can happen in the game. Um,
Yeah.
and then finally, what do you think of? We have the new set coming out, and we know that there's a mechanologist. Do you think you're gonna
She's
switch
adorable.
over to the parrot?
I'm 100% adding her to my list of heroes that I play. She's as good as a dash to me.
Yeah, even without knowing the hero
I
ability or any of the cards.
We've seen the hero ability, we just don't know what it means
Sort
yet.
of. Yeah, sort
Um,
of.
yeah. But no, yeah, I most of the time when I pick my heroes, it's
Mm,
based on aesthetic.
yeah.
Um, I'll play the characters I like, and I'll figure out how to make them work mechanically after the fact.
Mm,
Puffin, 100% something I want to play. I love
yeah.
her already, and I'm excited to see what she can do.
What card do you think that they'll print? I don't know. So for me, the way that they've been talking about this set is the similar to how they were talking about Mistveil. So like I think it's gonna be kind of a busted set. I'm really hyped for it specifically. I mean, Necromancer, I've been waiting for that. Mechanologist, that looks. I'm really excited for that as well. Of course. What card do you think they're gonna print that's just gonna break one of the Mechanologists open?
I'm really actually hoping they don't. I like playing the heroes that are underplayed. I love being a mechanologist, but my hope is that most of the good mechanologist cards that come from this are relegated to the pirate talent.
Okay.
I want one new crank item for Dash
I
and
think we'll
one
get
new
that.
boost card. Yeah. Um, I'm not completely sure what I want it to do, but I want I want crank items that deal with gold in some way
Hmm.
for Puffin and not for Io. Do not
Oh,
give
okay.
gold to Io.
Yeah, no, that sounds
It
really
would be super
dangerous.
hard.
You will, yeah, imagine drawing like four more cards every turn because you're already drawing two off of Spark. You're drawing one off
Yeah.
of Cerebellum Processor. That was actually something I was gonna
I
ask. Is you think so? You think Pirate's gonna be a talent and not like Royal?
oh. Yeah, I think it'll be a talent.
Okay, you'll
That
think
would
it'll
be
be a
my
talent.
guess.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and for your you got top four right at the Battle Hardened.
In Charlotte, no.
Oh,
I
okay.
actually lost my first game in the top eight.
Oh man, sorry.
It was a good game though.
Yeah.
It was against an Enigma,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
which
yeah.
I think is not by much. I played 4 max velocities that game.
That's insane that you lost the game playing four max velocities. That's that's just kind of crazy. That's a little
Yeah,
unlucky.
they can't feel bad about that. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So you
Mhm.
said that you're planning on being in Nats. I'm excited to see you there. I'll be there as well. Are you playing in Nats?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
If we make it, I'll definitely be playing.
Okay, good. Well, I hope the best of luck to you playing in that. I hope the best of luck to you on all of your endeavors from now until then, basically. I'm excited to see you all out there. Have a good time and just, let's go to Vegas. But yeah, do
Absolutely.
you have any do you have anything that you want to plug at the end of the episode here, or any socials, any sort of teammates, any people that you want to shout out?
Um, my partner Jasper and my best friend Abe that I travel with, and I guess in terms of the socials, I am starting a Patreon tonight. If I could like send you
Oh,
the link to put in the
yeah,
description.
yeah, definitely.
Um, I'm gonna be posting like sideboard guide for what I played in Charlotte,
Okay,
which I was actually like kind of opposed to writing initially, but enough people wanted me to do it that I'm willing to, and I'm enjoying the process.
yeah,
I think I'm gonna try and post, mechanologist lists or thoughts every week or two.
okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, congratulations. I hope that all goes really well for you. And yeah, thank you very much for coming out here and talking to me. It looks like a beautiful sunset out there. Um, I
yeah,
won't I won't take you away from that anymore. It looks really nice. So yeah, have a great night.
yeah. Thank you,
Thank you very much.
thank you for having me here. Good night.
Yeah,
Take care.
you too.